Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The Defense Department's education activity, known as DODEA, has trouble delivering special needs services for children overseas. The Government Accountability Office finds a number of reasons, including the way DODEA formulates staffing requirements. We get more now from the GAO's Director of K-12 Education Research, Jackie Nowicki. Ms. Nowicki, good to have you with us.
Pleasure to be here.
And this is your first Federal Drive interview and my last one, so we've got something in common there. But let's talk about the Defense Department's education activity. DODEA special needs pupils, I guess, have problems getting the services they need mostly overseas. Is that the issue?
Correct, mostly overseas. What we found was that services are often limited or unavailable, and that results in service delays or disruptions, if you will. Largely, that's a problem because the number of service minutes that students are required to receive is legally binding. So it presents challenges when kids are not receiving the services to which they're entitled.
These are legally binding by education statutes of the United States, or are these military standards?
They are legally binding because children's IEPs, or individualized education plans, which lay out the services that kids should receive, are legally binding documents.
And what are the range of services that special needs kids might need? Because I think there's probably a large list of them, but not the entire list applying to any given individual.
Absolutely. So anything from occupational therapy, physical therapy, it could be Braille readers. It really depends on the nature of a student's disability, hence why these plans are individualized to any individual student's needs. It could be, if they have dyslexia, for example, it could be specialized reading programs. They could need additional math help if they have dysgraphia. Really runs the gamut.
Sure. And is there any particular range of services that are mostly in short supply over there, overseas?
We looked specifically, for example, at physical therapy and occupational therapy and found, challenges in both. I would say for occupational therapy services, on average, kids are waiting 3 months for occupational therapy. But worst case scenario, some kids were waiting more than a year for those services. Physical therapy was slightly less worse. On average, they were waiting a month and a half for their physical therapy services. But again, worst case scenario, you're looking, 5.5 months for some children.
And who is providing these services? Is it local nationals in the nations where the base is, or is it DOD employees that might be in short supply?
Yeah, great question. So it depends on whether the school is located, within the United States or overseas. So for schools that are within the United States, all of those services are provided by the school staff, DODEA school staff. Overseas, it's a bit of a different story. Related services, so things like physical and occupational therapy, those are not provided by school staff. They are provided by military services staff, so still U.S. nationals, but a different part of the Defense Department, where those folks are residing, which of course raises some issues around coordination and kind of where those staff can be hired and who deploys them and to what locations.
Right, because I think in some nations where the military has staff and therefore has children in DODEA schools, you probably would want U.S. people providing that, as opposed to what might be available in some of those, let's say, austere nations.
And the way the school system is set up overseas, it is always DOD employees, either full-time employees or contracted employees. And even, some kids do go out on the local economy, so to speak, for additional services, but that is very dicey, for a number of reasons: availability, language barriers, all kinds of things, sort of create issues there.
Yeah, you can imagine it's one thing if you're in France or Germany. It's another thing if you're in Pakistan or Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, it really, you get into sort of cultural competency, especially around psychological disorders, anxiety. I mean, there are a lot of disorders and things that American kids are treated for that if you go overseas, another country or another culture might not even recognize, what the child is experiencing as a particular problem. So it can be difficult to obtain services in other countries off base, for sure.
We're speaking with Jackie Nowicki. She's Director of K-12 Education Research at the Government Accountability. And just give us a sense of the numbers here, how many students might be affected, how many schools might be having this issue.
Sure. So DODEA runs about 166 schools worldwide. Gosh, tens of thousands of kids, 60, 70,000 kids in a school year are educated in DODEA schools. And those are children of active military people and also children of civilian dependents. So, people working for the Defense Department, contractors, civilian DOD. There's a range of kids that attend DODEA schools.
And if you add it all up, it's the size of a good-sized school district in the United States, just scattered.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And are DOD and DODEA officials aware of this problem, of the delay in getting these services that kids are actually entitled to legally?
They are. And we, based on the course of our work, we made a number of recommendations to sort of help lessen the problems there. One of the things that we found was that the way DODEA allocates its staff, for example, for special education teachers, is based on student headcounts and does not consider the required service minutes that individual kids are supposed to receive. And because service minutes can vary so widely among students, it's really problematic that when you're allocating staff, you're only considering the number of kids in a classroom and not the amount of time that those children need services for. So we recommended that DOD adjust its staffing formulas to consider, at least as one factor, the number of minutes kids are required to receive. And DODEA did take that into consideration. So that's
in other
positive.
words, there's no averages here. If there's 100 students, then 10% will need this much. You really can't go that way. You have to evaluate each population in place.
Exactly. And it's very difficult, because it changes by student, by year. Military kids are an incredibly mobile population. The average military student might change schools 9 times over the course of their K-12 career. So it is not without its challenges to appropriately staff these schools when you have such a highly mobile population, not to mention the general issue that we're experiencing in this country, where we have shortages of special education teachers nationwide. We have shortages of physical therapists and occupational therapists. So there's a whole host of challenges that DOD is facing here.
And one of the recommendations was kind of interesting to have the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, I guess that's where DODEA lives, directs the DODEA director to ensure that any special education paraeducators who work with students who may need behavioral supports receive crisis training. That is, the paraeducators need crisis training?
Yes, and this was a huge issue. So paraeducators are not special education teachers, but they are, people who often provide support in small groups or to one-on-one with students, and particularly for students who have emotional impairments or who are prone because of their disorder to have behavioral management challenges. We found that paraeducators who often interact with those students are not necessarily being provided crisis management training, meaning they are not trained to know how to de-escalate behaviors, which puts them and the students at risk.
And what would you say are your other couple of top recommendations? Because this is a pretty full list you've got here. I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 major recommendations.
Yeah, and another one I think that rose to the top for me is that nearly everyone we talked to overseas, and we conducted nearly 100 interviews with all manner of staff, teachers, parents, you name it, they all said that DOD's guidance on how to implement their special education policies are not specific enough, they're out of date, they're unclear, and it really doesn't give teachers enough to work with there. So we recommended that although DOD says it's in the process of updating this guidance, teachers are very confused. They don't know what to do in the meantime. And that has resulted in wide variation throughout the world in terms of, how special education policy is being implemented. And what that looks like on the ground is, for example, kids who have what's known as specific learning disabilities, which often can be a developmental delay in reading, Some of those kids are getting the supports that they need, and some of those kids aren't because policy is being interpreted differently around the world. That's another recommendation that we made, was to make sure that kids who need adjusted curriculum to help them with developmental delays around reading have access to the sort of modified curriculum, if you will, or modified supports that will help them learn to read. It's a huge issue for kids.
Jackie Nowicki is Director of K-12 Education Research at the Government Accountability Office. Fair to say they took your recommendations and agree with them?
They agreed, I think, in principle. They called it a partial agree in their technical terms. But yeah, I think they agreed with the spirit of what GAO was recommending and largely recognized the challenges that, that we pointed out. I don't think any of them were really new to them. It's tricky to figure out how to solve these problems, but, I'm sure DOD is up to the challenge.
And we'll post this interview along with a link to her report at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Hear the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Retired U.S. Army General Robert Brown's path to leadership was anything but conventional. Drawn to the military by its unwavering focus on mission, his decades of service in the Army emphasized mentorship, trust, and selflessness. Now president of the Association of the United States Army AUSA, General Brown joined Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA, to share insights on making tough decisions and leading with purpose.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons in Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Today I'm joined by General Robert Brown, President and CEO of the Association of the United States Army, AUSA. General Brown, welcome, and thank you for joining.
Well, thanks for having me, Shane. Really appreciate it. Great to be here.
Talk about why you decided to begin your career in the military, and how did that eventually transition into many leadership roles in the Army?
I think people sometimes have this idea that folks in the military knew from the time they were born they wanted to be in the military, and nothing could be further from the truth. There are some people that are like that, but I think it's the exception. So for me, I was a pretty good basketball player in the state of Michigan my last 3 years in high school. And at the time, there was another pretty good basketball player named Irvin Magic Johnson. That was a senior in high school at the same time. And I remember my parents complaining how parents are with the kids, that he was getting all the publicity. And I said, he's pretty good, and turned out to be okay. Well, he was going to Michigan State on a basketball scholarship, and I got a basketball scholarship to University of Michigan. But then a guy named Coach K, Coach Mike Krzyzewski, was the coach at West Point, United States Military Academy, West Point at the time. So he was the head coach, and he came to my house and was very passionate about West Point. And so I said, okay, I'll visit. And I did my last official visit there and fell in love with the idea of selfless service and all that West Point stood for. The meaning I saw in serving a cause greater than self and defending your nation and the Constitution, to me, it struck me as an amazing opportunity. So I went to play basketball,
Wow.
and did not intend on staying in, but then lo and behold, like 40 years later, I ended up retiring. So people come in for all different reasons, and for me it was initially basketball, but that idea of selfless service I hadn't been exposed to really struck home.
Well, finding a mission that resonates with you personally matters a lot. Your leadership style, has it changed over time? And then is there a moment that stands out to you as something that was particularly impactful to you and your leadership style?
I think when you're becoming a leader, all of us in whatever field, you're trying to figure out, you're reading and studying about leaders, and if you see a famous leader, say, I'm a little bit like that famous leader or this famous leader, but eventually you come to the realization that you have to be yourself. Yes, you may have to, we all have strengths and weaknesses. You may have to work on your strengths a little more and fix your weaknesses, but nobody does you better than yourself. And so I think for me, that moment when I was a young leader, what we would call a company commander, so 3-4 years out of West Point, had about 180 soldiers I was responsible for, and to see that tough mission we had, forming a team and working very hard with literally lives at stake on what you do, and then to see it come together was just incredibly rewarding. And it wasn't so much the huge success, but When a soldier would say, "Hey, sir, that was really tough training. That was great. It's going to help us a lot." That feedback, it's like, boy, you just feel like you could keep going forever, developing those teams and being successful on a difficult mission.
So I think you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but in your mind, what makes leadership in the Army unique?
Well, lives are at stake. And just about anything you're doing, whether you're saving lives, which you do a lot. A lot of people think, you're in the Army, you just go and you're constantly fighting. No, there's a lot of things we do in the Army, and you spend way more time saving lives. Again, in a disaster, I think the ultimate is you may make a decision and someone's life depends on it. That's a lot of pressure. So we study leadership a lot. And the other thing I think is that it requires a level of trust beyond certainly any leadership in any organization. You can't be an effective leader without trust. But in the military, it's trust at a level that you're trusting folks with your life. And so that is a whole different level of establishing that trust. And it requires a greater level of character, requires a greater degree of care, and I would say love for the people you lead, the soldiers you lead. And leadership is still leadership. The stakes are different, but the same principles that apply in the Army and the military apply everywhere. It's just the stakes are a little greater there, but it's the exact same principles.
Have you ever taken a significant risk, and then what was the outcome?
The answer is yes. I don't believe you can succeed in any field without taking risks. It's going to lead to failure, taking risks. And it's a concern I have today. And to get back to the direct question, I can't tell you how many times I took risks. And I can think of about 12 times where the risks I took almost led to me being relieved and my career being over 40 years. Numerous times, from a young officer to a more senior officer. Now, they're not just wild risks, out of control. These are calculated risks where you think you're doing the right thing. In some cases, that was, there's a leadership thing that's very important, is to give the credit to the subordinates and take the blame when things go wrong. So the risk of a subordinate that's trying to do the right thing, it doesn't work out. I'm not talking about, they feel something immoral or illegal. No, they're trying to do the right thing, but it may not work out the way it was planned, and so they fail. And then you go to the leadership and say, hey, relieve me, don't relieve, Captain so-and-so. He was trying to do the right thing. So you, in essence, take the blame and we'll be relieved. I've done that numerous times, and and sometimes you have to, I think, to have that trust with those you lead, you have to be able to look in the mirror. And if you're doing the job for a promotion or the next job or to be a general, well, you more than likely won't be and shouldn't be. And I think that's very true in many fields as well. It's not that, you don't want to do your best, but you've got to think of the organization first and the team and first. And so you have to be able to look yourself in the mirror and feel good about who you're looking at, and not that you were out for yourself. That builds that trust in the organization. They know you're going to empower them, trust them. In today's world, in any business, if you look at business, the ones that are exceeding are the ones that are empowering their people, taking risks, and they do extremely well. The ones who are holding them back and making all the decisions at the top, well, they're going to fail.
And people that work for you see that,
yes,
and they're reading that. And
yes,
if you don't do that, then you've lost the trust of every single person on your leadership team, and you might
yes,
as well call it a day. If they think you're in it for
yes,
yourself,
that's right.
Nobody respects that.
That's a tremendous point, Shane. And I would say this is an amazing thing. From the time we're born, we're evaluating those who are in charge of us, those who lead us, from your parents, your teachers, your coaches, your scout leaders. It doesn't matter, you name it. And if you ask somebody who's the best leader you ever worked for, rarely is it the smartest, rarely is it, whatever. It's the person they knew cared about them or the team and not themselves, right? They knew it. It was very clear. And as a leader, that is absolutely critical.
The last question is always kind of fun and interesting. Who is one person, somebody that you know personally, perhaps someone well-known, but someone who impacted your leadership style, and why?
Well, the first answer to that would be that I was very fortunate to have many amazing leaders over the years, amazing leaders, and I could name like 10 of them. But the one I would point out for this, I would go back to my days as a basketball player. Coach K would be the guy, Mike Krzyzewski, the winningest coach of all time. He taught me how to build a team. And we stayed close after I graduated, and we talked leadership for hours over the years. And in fact, very proud over the years, whether it was 32 soldiers or 150,000, they called me coach. So it was kind of a compliment, I thought. And, and I got that really from him, And at the time, I was playing for him. It was his first coaching job at West Point, and we knew he was really good. I'm not sure I would have predicted he'd be the winningest coach of all time. That's pretty amazing.
What an amazing person to know, and
win 3 gold medals coaching the Olympic team and everything else. But definitely that I would credit him the most with building a team, and I was known as a team builder and took a lot of pride in that and enjoyed that in my time in the military.
Well, General Brown, thank you very much for joining
my
me,
honor.
sharing your
thanks
stories.
For having me. And,
really appreciate it.
Really appreciate it. And thanks for doing the podcast on leadership, because it's awful important. We need it everywhere. And I think it's key to our great country.
And thank you all for tuning in. This is Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA, reminding you to empower your team and embrace challenges. Until the next time on Lessons in Leadership.
Find the full podcast and future episodes of Lessons in Leadership on the Federal News Network app and anywhere you enjoy your podcasts.